if you go and talk to Republicans about public education, and if I would tell them that, I would like to decide where my kids should go to school. And I think the money that I earn for that, I should be able to put wherever my values and my wallet directs them, right? But when I talk to Republicans today, very few of them are challenging the public education system, for instance. So in that sense, they're playing in the same space as most people on the left. And the same thing with Social Security, Medicare.
So growing up, I always thought the opposite of Republican was Democrat, the opposite of left was right. Well, this gentleman thinks maybe not so much, and I'm starting to wonder what the difference between left and right is political. Anders, and I'm going to slaughter this, Ingemarson, how was that?
That's pretty close.
Pretty close.
Yes, yeah.
Author of Right or Wrong, Not Left or Right. So help me out with this, and I'm going to try to get through your Texas accent as we do this. You say that left and right really aren't left and right. What do you mean by that?
Well, so left and right today, as we see it, Democrats, Republicans, conservative, leftists or liberals, to a large extent they're playing in the same political space. And that space is what we call today a welfare state, welfare statism. And what welfare statism claims is that there is a role for society, that we have to give up some of our rights to society for the common good, for the majority, maybe for certain minorities. You as an individual, we have lost sight of those individual rights that this country was founded on.
Is this just the same old hardcore libertarianism, anarcho-capitalism thought that, with spontaneous order, everything will be fine. And so whether you're on the right building a military or you're on the left building some sort of redistribution system, you're still taking away people's hard-earned property in order to build a world that you might not want to be part of.
Well, so let's untangle a couple of things.
Yeah.
So it's definitely capitalist. It's not anarcho-capitalist, because under capitalism, there is definitely a role for government. But that role is very limited. The role of the government is to protect those rights that we as individuals have. And as we go about in society, we interact with one another, we respect that other people have the same rights. Now, and the government steps in, they protect us against foreign enemies, military. Law enforcement helps us to control it inside the country's border. And then, of course, if someone does something that is wrong, then we have a court system that is meted out.
And also a court system to decide all sorts of contractual disputes as well.
Correct.
All right.
Yes.
All right. So far, I'm tracking, and I think I largely agree. But left and right, let's just substitute Republicans and Democrats.
Sure.
And over the course of my life, the roles really seem to have changed quite a bit. That Republicans are becoming much more protectionistic on this side. The Democrats who used to speak for minorities are the ones now putting in speech codes and telling you can't say that. It's really pretty weird. But in your mind, they're basically the same sort of party or the same sort of thing. Am I understanding it?
Yes,
and
you're right.
Then help me understand, because I look at these two things, these two parties, and I go, this one likes property rights. This one doesn't. This one wants lower taxes, lower regulation. This one wants higher taxes, higher regulation. This one wants less redistribution. This one wants more redistribution. And then there's some social issues we can go back and forth. This one wants to protect your gun rights. This one doesn't. And I'm like, no, those seem to be pretty substantial differences between left and right. How could they be on the same side of the spectrum?
Yeah, so you're right in that there are differences between them, obviously. But on a fundamental level, and there is more of the freedom on the right, on the political right, on the Republican side. But there is also a large acceptance of, for instance, these large social programs that we have, or an a discomfort with challenging them. So for instance, if you go and talk to Republicans about public education, and if I would tell them that, I would like to decide where my kids should go to school. And I think the money that I earn for that, I should be able to put wherever my values and my wallet directs them, right? But when I talk to Republicans today, very few of them are challenging the public education system, for instance. So in that sense, they're playing in the same space as most people on the left. And the same thing with Social Security, Medicare. You saw in the last few years the discussions about repealing Obamacare. They couldn't pass that, for instance.
They couldn't pass it, but there was still a fight. You had, it came down to one very liberal Republican, John McCain, who switched what he said he was going to do and kept it going. But the party at all still is against Obamacare, that collectivistic thing that forces people to buy private products.
That is true. They're against, but they're not for very much. There isn't much of a vision of where we should go with healthcare. And that is where I, in my book, is laying out a path to where capitalism, as the system that protects your individual rights, offer the solution. We see that in many other areas of society. For instance, the last 50 years, the information and digital revolution, that didn't happen by chance. It happened primarily because it was neglected by politicians and lawmakers. They didn't know what was going on.
And it also happened too fast for them to do anything about it. By the time they wanted to regulate this, well, no one's on AOL anymore. We're over here. You're regulating stuff that has already been disrupted, and the slowness of government can't do that. I look at cryptocurrencies, and now the government's going, wait a second, this is a real threat to our very existence. Yeah. We can't have somebody else but us print money. Yeah. And so we're gonna crack it down. So let me say something that might bolster. I'm thinking about the minimum wage. And on a federal level, there's no reason for a federal minimum wage. The idea that a guy in a poor county in Kansas and somebody in Manhattan should have the same minimum wage makes no sense. When Republicans were in control of all of the presidency, House, and Senate, they had an opportunity to make the case and get rid of the federal minimum wage. But instead, they thought, no, let's do the expedient thing. Let's ignore it. And as inflation creeps up, it'll just kind of disappear as something. It doesn't matter what it is because inflation will take care of it. They didn't make the case that this was a bad policy. It was unethical. You shouldn't legislate people's relationships, and we need to get rid of it. They failed to do that, and now you've got people going, well, this is why we need to attach it to the inflation level. We need to make Drive for 15 a national issue. They missed that opportunity. Is that the kind of stuff you're talking about? Yes,
it is. And I think you're right in that sense. They missed the opportunity, but they miss every opportunity because they are uncomfortable with challenging the moral premise behind these programs, right?
Wait. Are you telling me that politicians don't have the strength to make a moral fight on issues? You should call 60 Minutes on that because they're just expedient. They understand what needs to happen. And are you asking too much of them to actually make moral decisions on these issues, not political decisions?
What I'm really fundamentally asking of you to make those decisions because we get the politicians we deserve. You may not think so, but they are really good at one thing, and that is putting their finger in the air and feel where the wind is blowing. And if we don't challenge on these things and say that, I have the right to manage my retirement planning, I have the right to decide where my child should go to school. If we don't do that, they don't see a reason to take up that cause. If we start doing that, they will start looking around and saying, something's going on here. And that's how you start to shift this and create what I call in the book the moral groundswell for these things. And there are many examples in the past of this. For instance, if you take same-sex marriage, whether you agree with the Supreme Court ruling or not of a few years ago, if you look back at when that movement started, it was in the 1970s. A small percentage of Americans thought that same-sex marriage was something that should happen. By the time that the ruling came about a few years ago, it was 60%. I think it's up to 70% now. And that's how you start. And what made it successful is that the movement started out as a moral movement. They thought this is right. And that is the approach you have to take to every one of these issues.
Let me challenge you on that, because I too am fascinated by the gains that the gay movement did to get marriage equality. It's stunning to me. And yes, they made a moral argument, but really they created a political groundswell. First you had Stonewall. That got them so upset that then they started to organize. You started to see gay pride parades where they were ridiculed. Then you started to see this fight over whether or not gays should out other gays. That way you find out, what, my cousin is gay? I never knew. He doesn't seem like a bad guy. And then they started getting into media, into culture. You started having the first lesbian kiss on television, and then you can't make a movie without gay characters, and it changed the narrative. For me, that is politics more than it is morality.
Well, it's politics on a moral foundation, because these people believe they were right. And you have to believe that you're right. I'm not saying that necessarily every moral movement is correct, but they believe they're correct.
So let's switch it from a social issue to economic issues. I have found that people on the left understand that people should be free to have relationships, that they should be able to have, be able to marry whom they like, they should be able to go to bed with whom they like. And what I found is they really care about consensual relationships when people are naked. But when people have clothes on, they hate consensual relationships. You need to have a minimum wage to keep people from having a consensual relationship they both agree on. Financially, they don't want people to have a relationship. They hate consensual relationships when it comes to economic matters. So it seems to me, my side, the libertarian side, we have lost the ability or to make that moral case of the foundations of capitalism. It's not just a great system because it has provided us with unparalleled wealth. It's the right system morally.
I mean, that is the key issue, and that is what I'm laying out in my book. So, I mean, we're talking the same language here, and you're absolutely right. We have done a lousy job of I think, describing and providing a vision for the greatness of capitalism as a moral system and as a consequence also an economic system. Part of the problem is that we haven't had it consistently implemented anywhere at any time. Areas of the economy has had it, as we talked about the information revolution and so on and so forth. The other part is that historically it's a relatively new movement. I mean, it's a couple of hundred years, 250, 300 years, John Locke, end of the 17th century. It's, which, you know, may feel like an eternity if you're in your 20s and your 30s, right? But if you look at the history and how we have evolved as a society, starting out maybe agriculture 6,000 years ago, and, you know, life was brutish and short and bad, and people, the collective, the group was necessary for your survival. And it's just in the last couple of hundred years that we've discovered, you know what, here's a system where people can be free, and that doesn't mean instant death. And you don't change those things overnight. And here's
the other part that I think that people who are scared of capitalism don't get. You said back then you needed to rely on one another to survive. We still do today.
Absolutely.
The question is, do we get to organize with whom we work, or does some all-powerful committee in some fluorescent lit basement committee room decide what that community is and which will serve us the best? And for me, freedom is quite simple. I get to make my own decisions. And collectivism is, no, somebody else gets to make my decisions. And in that case, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of left and right. All right, people want to get think right or wrong, not left and right. Where do they go?
They go to Amazon, of course, find the book. The ebook is available. This is actually a proof copy of the paperback that will be out here in a few weeks. And it will also be available on Amazon. Just Google me, Anders Ingemarson, or the title of the book. Think right or wrong, not left or right.
Best of luck starting this cultural revolution.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.